Alanna is an operator I wasn't very sure about before getting to use her. My experience with Artificers is almost non-existent, and at first glance, she looked to be an operator that didn't really have all that much going. Trying her out though left me pleasantly surprised, even if she's not necessarily making waves with her kit, and takes a fair bit of work to see the best performance from.
I'll take the wheel, you take a breather.
Unlike all other supporters, Artificer supporters are melee operators with a focus on physical damage. Their stat lines are very middle of the road, with attack stats generally sitting around the higher 500s to the lower 600s, defenses floating around the higher 400s and lower 500s, and HP pools ranging through the 2500s and just into the 3000s on the higher end. These are all stats that are nothing to write home about, but not necessarily bad either at the same time. This makes them decently reliable by themselves, having stats similar to what you'd see on a Pioneer Vanguard. The main draw when using an Artificer is the support devices they can deploy. Focusing specifically on Alanna, her talent allows her to carry 3 nutties that allow an operator to ignore defense when attacking enemies. 2 of these can be deployed at once. The devices last for 30 seconds, and effects from said devices don't stack. So you won't be able to do things like, say, stacking stainless devices for attack boosting. By itself, this number isn't high at all. Operators like Cutter with Swordmaster's Y module, Pinecone with skill 1, or even Enforcer against enemies with a weight of 3 or higher can all ignore defense, among a good few others. It's not particularly special, so it's understandable that looking at what Alanna does can leave one wondering what she even brings to the table, and maybe if she should even be sitting at the table in the first place. Alanna can supply her defense ignore to anyone, however, on top of being an operator that functions just fine on her own, and this isn't taking into account what her skills can help do. At Mastery 3, operators with a support device attached get an additional 23 attack speed, and Alanna support devices last for another 30 seconds. This allows for a solid minute of increased attack speed for just having skill 1, which isn't bad at all. No need to charge or time anything correctly on Alanna's end. As with any attack speed buff, this can be paired with other attack speed boosters to get more impact out of Alanna's skill. Pairing this with something like Wancheng's skill 2 can give operators a 48 attack speed boost, which can be more than enough to make a difference in performance. Even by itself though, 23 attack speed can make a marked difference in damage output, and these devices can be dropped a few times before they run out, which gives Alanna value for her time on the field. And again, these can be set on anyone. Even though you'd be missing out on the defense ignore part of her devices, you can attach these to a caster or supporter to help them along. Maybe you'd give it to a ritualist to activate elemental burst faster, or make better use of a caster's skill uptime. Beyond increasing damage potential, it's also a great utility for operators with offensive charge skills, allowing them to access their skills a little bit sooner than normal. The only real downside here, of course, is that Alanna has no way to replenish her devices after having used them all, forcing you to have to retreat for a minute if you want to access them again. The same problem that most Artificers face using their skill 1. Though I'd argue that whatever you're trying to do would mostly be over by that point, as the average map doesn't drag on for too long. When using skill 2 at Mastery 3, Alanna gains an additional 50% attack for just under 1000 attack, an additional 50 attack speed, and her talent effect increases to 2.7 times its natural effectiveness. When this skill ends, Alanna gets 1 support device back. This skill is the one to focus on. Without potential, Alanna is giving anyone under the effect of her devices 216 defense ignore for 15 seconds. At potential 5, this moves up to 243. These numbers aren't game-breaking, but they're certainly not ineffective. This is also before module level 3. Adding that into Alanna's talent sees these numbers jump to 270 and 297 respectively. Getting close to 300 defense ignore really isn't that bad at all, even if it's just for 15 seconds at a time. Just as a quick and admittedly simple example, Quartz here is hitting for 1796 every swing. This heavy defender here has a defense of 960 on challenge mode. Normally, this comes out to 836 physical damage for the heavy defender on every exchange. Using Alanna's skill 2, she ignores 270 of the previous defense to get 1106 on every hit. This is a 32% difference between the before and after in this scenario, and a substantial increase in the amount of damage Quartz is doing here. I unfortunately don't have Alanna at potential 5, but if that were the case here, we'd be seeing Quartz's 836 turn into 1133 on every swing, which would be around 35% harder hitting than normal. And this is kind of looking at a vacuum scenario. Talents like Alanna's aren't going to be just used in isolation. If, for example, along with supporting an operator with Alanna's device, you use Shamare's Cursed Doll to first cut the defense of enemies, before ignoring what remains, you can see some satisfying results. I think it's also important to mention that while her support devices don't stack their effects amongst themselves, they do stack with the defense ignore that other operators themselves may have access to, giving her support devices a raised floor to operate from. You can just bolster operators like Cutter, or any artilleryman sniper with a module. Unless you happen to be Seysa. Finally, unlike Skill 1, Skill 2 can actually sustain Alanna's ability to give out defense ignore, so she can keep her support going without having to retreat. The cycling here is decent, only taking 20 seconds to charge. The 15-second duration keeps her support devices in rotation, thanks to its shorter length, and makes it so you're never waiting too long if you happen to need a device or want to stock them for later. I think there's no question as to which skill should have prioritized Mastery, as Skill 2 can just be that much more effective over the attack speed boosting of Skill 1 generally, and the fact that it's only going to be truly effective when it's pushed to its limit. Regarding upgrades being needed, the same can be said for Module as well, as you're only going to see Alanna at her best when these things are all together. And herein lies Alanna's greatest flaw. The issue with operators like her is that she needs a lot of investment to get started, even to the point where things like potential make a difference. Mastery and module cost, added on top of the general 5-star tax, admittedly make it that much harder to justify putting time and effort into someone who just isn't going to be turning the game on its head. It's the reason I had her sitting in base 24/7 until her skills had their masteries, and trust was built up to 100 to say anything. The difference just feels that big. From Elite 2 to Skill 2 Mastery 3, to 100 trust and finally actually getting Module to level 3 for the best defense ignore, it takes a fair amount of invested time and resources. And to be completely honest, the return isn't that insane either. I'm not the biggest fan of this kind of design. It feels as if Alanna's numbers were decided with the idea of her kit being just about fully built as a baseline for anyone trying to use her. It's pretty unfortunate. Despite things like that though, she's the kind of operator that I find pretty fun to use, and I like her regardless, even if it takes quite a bit to get there. I doubt she's all that popular, but if you've used her yourself or just have general opinions, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this rather unique operator. Thanks for listening and have a good one.